Hello everyone and welcome to this new video. In this video, we are going to discuss and see from an architecture perspective of how we can use the canary testing. We are going to understand it from an architecture perspective from our diagram. That should clear all our doubts, and then in the next video we are going to do this practically on the Kubernetes cluster. Now in our, if you have not gone through our last video, this video is in next part to our previous video where we discuss about how we can implement the canary testing in case of Kubernetes. So if you haven't watched that video, I will suggest you to first watch that video before going through this video, and you can find the link within the description. So let's get started with the canary deployment, and let's try to understand how basically this works. So whenever you are going to initiate a canary deployment inside a Kubernetes, you basically need to differentiate between the canary pods and the normal pods. Now, what is normal pods? Normal pods is your regular pods which are basically running the application. The canary pods are the special pods which has been created during the time of canary testing. Now, how do you differentiate between the two pods? So this is done on the basis of labels. You will have to put a label, and you need to use the match label on basis of which it's going to pick the label, and the labels for two of them should differ and clearly identify your image. And for that, we are what we have done is we are going to create a new deployment. That this new deployment will be specifically for the canary pods in addition to our normal deployment which is already running the application. Now once we have done this and the new pods are in place, we are going to do the canary testing, and once the canary testing is complete and we find that the application is working fine with our new code, then we can go ahead and reduce the replica count to 0 or remove the deployment in the first place. So both the ways you can do it, and this is going to remove the canary pod, and at the same time you would have already tested that your application is working fine, so you are good to release in the production or in the production environment on your normal deployment which is already running your application. So let's understand this from the diagram. Now this diagram clearly depicts how canary testing actually works. This is a pictorial representation. So if you find I have a deployment which is already there, this is what we call as an original app. Original app can be anything. Like in our case, we have basically taken an example of a catalog application. Okay, now basically when you do a deployment, it will create a replica set for that application. Suppose we have defined the replicas as 3, so I get 3 pods: pod 1, pod 2, and pod 3. Now this replica set is controlling the number of pods on the basis of replicas, and we are basically, the application runs on the port number 8080. So if you have to receive the request, you need to make a request on the port number 8080 that would be served by the pod 1, pod 2, pod 3, of which is being controlled by the let's, for our understanding, let's say replica set R1. Okay, so basically R1 is controlling the pods which is running on the port number 8080, running our application catalog. And if you see, I have basically added an additional label along with our original label. If you see, this label is track stable. Now track stable simply represents that this pods are basically running the stable version of my code, or you can say the initial version. Let's consider that the initial version which we are running is suppose v1 or version 1. Okay, so suppose this is the version 1 which is currently stable. It is already running in the production environment, so we can consider that this is the stable version of our code. That's why I have put a track as stable. Now we want to update this v1 to latest. Okay, so suppose the next version is our, obviously this is the latest version to which we want to update. It can be v2 or v3, like that, depending upon your versioning of the code. So suppose I want to update my code to the latest. Now, before updating the code, the application is critical. Suppose it's an financial application, it cannot have any downtime. So this is where we can leverage the canary testing. Now, in order to leverage the canary testing, you will have to initiate a new deployment, and this new deployment will be specifically for the canary testing. Most of all the YAML file that you are going to write for this would be same as the original application, just the difference would be within the labels and the image. Okay, these two. Suppose this was using the image one, okay, and docker image one that we have already created. So we want to update and deploy our new application, so it will be using something like image 2. So suppose if we want to deploy this image 2, but we want to be sure that there is no issue with our deployment, then you can leverage this canary testing, and for that you are going to do an additional deployment, and this deployment is again going to create a replica set for your canary. Now this replica set, because we are doing the canary testing, so we do not do it from a scaling perspective. That is, it's not for the high availability. So it's more of thing like this, that it's more of validating whether our application is working or not, rather than going into high availability and all that stuff. So we set replica to 1. Okay, and when we set replica to 1, so it only creates a single canary pod. Okay, now when the replica set, that is R2, let's say. Okay, so this R2 basically is controlling the canary pod that we have created. Now why we are saying is, does it differ from the normal pods? It's only differ in the version, that is, it's running the image 2. And again here, if you see, it is also having the same label as app equal to catalog, and I have put a additional label track equal to canary. Okay, now if you look at this label specifically mentions that it is tracking the canary pod. Okay, which is running the updated version. So at a moment in time, we are having both the application version, like application version v1 and the latest application version live. Now how do you make it live? You are basically going to create a service. Now this service that I have created, it is actually tracking the label as app equal to catalog. Now since app equal to catalog, this label is there on both the deployments that we have done, that is our normal deployment as well as the canary deployment. So you will find that any request which is reaching to this service, app equal to catalog service, which my service is following, these are basically the labels. So that request will automatically be going to both the services, whether it's a normal service or whether it's a. So you will find that initially when a user makes a request, that goes to the pod 1, pod 2 and pod 3, and at the same time this request also goes to the canary pod, right? Now this, since this request is going to the canary pod as well. Okay, so we can, at this point, we have done the canary deployment, and now the important part come after the deployment is canary testing. So you will need to test whether your application is working fine with the new code that you have deployed or not. In this case, if you are sending a request to port number 8080, then the request will be going to your normal application which is already running the stable code. But at the same time, if you are sending a request to port number 8081, then that request will be going to the canary pods, and this is how we actually test the latest application. Now because the request that we serve for testing purpose on port number 8081 is being served from the canary pod, so we can do our actual testing, we can verify the logs, we can verify the request status, and if everything is working fine, then we conclude that the new deployment is valid and we can go ahead and do the deployment on the original application. Now once you conclude that you want to do the deployment on the original application, for the canary deployment, you can change the replicas as 0. When you change the replicas as 0, it will reduce the pod count to 0. Okay, so this is how you can get rid of Canary, because we don't need this now. We have already validated that the new code is working fine on one of the pods of Canary, and since we are sure that the new code is working fine, we can set the replicas to 0. Another way is that you can delete this deployment after the testing has been completed. So go ahead and delete this. It will remove the pods that has been added, and because our testing has been completed, so you can go ahead and delete this if you want. Any of the ways is fine. Now for the deployment part, you are actually going to replace do the deployment, which will eventually replace the image 1 with the image 2. Now since we are uh, good, we can go ahead and do the new deployment. It will do the rolling deployment or blueprint deployment depending upon how you have implemented it inside the Kubernetes cluster. So it's going to replace the original running pods of image 1 with the new pods running the image 2, and this is how you can perform the Canary testing. I hope this is clear to everyone now from the pictorial presentation, and basically the same implementation we are going to do next in our next video, basically practically. So that's all for this video. If you have any doubt, please do comment on the video. I will be getting back to you. At the same time, please do subscribe to our channel to get these videos in your inbox as soon as we post them. Thank you everyone. That's all for this video. See you in our